There is a quiet moment that happens to almost every young person alive today. A moment so small and so ordinary that you might not even notice it at first. But if you pay close attention, you will find it hiding in the space between putting your phone down and picking it back up again. And in that tiny sliver of silence, something extraordinary is happening inside your mind. Something that neuroscientists are only beginning to understand, something that philosophers have not yet found the right words to describe, and something that you, sitting wherever you are right now, have almost certainly felt but perhaps never had the language to explain. Because the truth is that living as a young person in the digital age is one of the most psychologically complex experiences any generation has ever had to navigate, and nobody gave you a manual. Nobody sat you down and explained what it would feel like to grow up with the entire weight of the world's information, opinions, comparisons, and crises streaming directly into your nervous system every single day, and that is precisely why we are here today. Because this conversation matters deeply, not in the way that a lecture matters, or a warning label matters, but in the way that a quiet conversation with someone who genuinely sees you matters. Because digital wellness for young people is not about demonizing technology, or pretending that screens are evil. It is about something far more profound, and far more personal than that. It is about understanding the relationship between your inner world, and the outer digital world you inhabit, and learning how to move through that relationship with intention, with curiosity, and with a kind of gentle self-awareness that nobody really teaches in school, but that may be one of the most important skills of your entire life. So let us begin at the beginning, which is not with a statistic or a study, though those matter too, but with the simple acknowledgement that you are a human being who is trying to figure out who you are, and that has always been the central work of youth, that searching, that questioning, that constant renegotiation of identity, and for every generation before yours, that process happened mostly in physical spaces, in school hallways and neighborhood parks and family kitchens, where the feedback you received about who you were came slowly and in small doses, but your generation is doing this ancient and deeply human work of self-discovery inside a digital environment that was not designed with your psychological well-being as its primary concern. And that is not an accusation, it is simply a truth worth sitting with, because the platforms you use every single day were built by engineers and designers who understood human psychology well enough to know how to keep your attention, how to trigger your brain's reward system, how to make the act of scrolling feel just satisfying enough that you keep doing it long past the point where it serves you. And this is not a conspiracy, it is just business. But the consequences of that business model land directly in your lived experience, in the way your mood shifts after spending an hour online, in the subtle anxiety that creeps in when you see someone else's life looking more interesting, or more beautiful, or more successful than your own, in the exhaustion you feel that is not quite physical but is somehow deeper than that. A kind of mental fatigue that sleep does not fully fix. And psychologists who study adolescent development have a word for what happens when young people are constantly exposed to curated, filtered, and idealized versions of other people's lives. They call it social comparison, but that phrase almost undersells the experience, because what you are actually doing when you scroll through images of people who seem happier or thinner, or more popular or more talented than you is engaging in an unconscious evaluation of your own worth. And the cruel irony is that the human brain was not built to make fair comparisons under these conditions. Your brain evolved in small communities where the number of people you compared yourself to was limited by geography and time. But now you are comparing yourself to thousands of people simultaneously, people whose lives you are seeing through the most flattering possible lens, and your brain is registering all of those comparisons as if they were real and fair and meaningful, which they are not, but knowing that intellectually and feeling it emotionally are two very different things. And this is one of the deepest tensions at the heart of digital wellness for young people, the gap between what you know and what you feel, and bridging that gap is not about willpower or discipline, it is about developing a new kind of literacy, a literacy of the self in digital spaces, which means learning to recognize what is happening inside you as it is happening, noticing when your mood changes after certain kinds of content, noticing when you feel energized versus depleted after different kinds of online interactions, noticing the difference between using technology as a tool that serves your genuine needs and using it as an escape from feelings that feel too uncomfortable to sit with. And this distinction is everything, because technology itself is morally neutral. It is neither good nor bad in any absolute sense. What matters is the quality of the relationship you have with it. And the word relationship is important here because it implies something dynamic and ongoing rather than something fixed. Your relationship with digital spaces will and should evolve as you grow. And part of growing into a digitally well person is developing the self-awareness to know when that relationship is nourishing you, and when it is quietly draining something essential from you. And one of the most philosophically interesting things about this moment in history is that your generation is the first to have to do this work in real time, without the benefit of elders who navigated the same landscape, without established traditions or cultural wisdom about how to live well. Inside the digital world, you are essentially pioneers, and that is both a burden and a genuinely remarkable thing, because the insights you develop about your own inner life in relation to technology will shape not just your individual well-being but the collective wisdom of an entire generation, and that matters more than you might realize right now. So when we talk about digital wellness, we are not talking about putting your phone in a drawer and going outside. Though sometimes that genuinely helps. We are talking about something more nuanced and more interior than that. We are talking about the cultivation of what some psychologists and philosophers call presence. The capacity to be fully in your own experience rather than perpetually distracted from it. And this is harder than it sounds in a world designed to fragment your attention, because attention is not just a cognitive resource, it is the medium through which you experience your own life. Every moment of genuine connection, every creative thought, every feeling of meaning or beauty or love passes through the channel of your attention, and when that channel is constantly interrupted and redirected by notifications and algorithms, and the endless novelty of digital content, something subtle but significant begins to happen to your inner life. It becomes harder to know what you actually think and feel as opposed to what you have been told to think and feel by the content you consume. It becomes harder to tolerate boredom, which might sound trivial but is actually profound because boredom is the psychological state in which some of the most important inner work happens. It is in boredom that creativity emerges, that self-reflection becomes possible, that you begin to hear the quieter voices within yourself that tell you what you actually value and desire and care about beneath the noise of external input. And there is a reason why so many young people today report feeling simultaneously overstimulated and deeply empty. It is because stimulation and nourishment are not the same thing. You can consume enormous quantities of digital content and still feel profoundly hungry for something real, something that connects to your actual life and your actual self. And recognizing this hunger is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that you are paying attention, that some part of you is wise enough to notice the difference between feeding the mind and feeding the soul. And digital wellness is ultimately about honoring that deeper hunger, about creating space in your life for the kinds of experiences that actually nourish you, whether that is deep conversation or creative work or time in nature, or the quiet satisfaction of learning something genuinely new, not because someone served it to you on an algorithm, but because you sought it out with intention. And here is something that research in positive psychology consistently finds, which is that the activities most associated with lasting well-being are the ones that require some degree of effort and engagement. The ones that pull you into a state of what psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi called flow. A state of absorbed concentration, where time dissolves and you feel most fully alive and capable. And this matters enormously in the context of digital wellness, because passive consumption, the kind of scrolling that happens almost without your conscious participation, rarely produces flow. It produces something more like numbness followed by restlessness. Whereas the activities that challenge you and require your whole self tend to leave you feeling more alive rather than less. And this is not a moral argument about laziness or screen time hours. It is a psychological observation about what actually makes human beings feel well and whole and meaningful to themselves. And you deserve to feel that way, not occasionally or as a reward for productivity, but as a baseline condition of your daily life. And building that baseline is the real project of digital wellness. It is less about restriction and more about expansion, expanding your capacity for presence, for depth, for the kind of engagement with your own life that no screen can provide for you. And it is also worth saying something about the social dimension of all of this, because human beings are fundamentally social creatures, and the internet has given you access to communities and connections that would have been impossible for any previous generation to find. And for many young people, especially those who feel different or isolated in their physical environments, online communities have been genuinely life-saving, providing belonging and understanding and mirrors of the self, that the immediate physical world could not offer. And this is real and important and should not be dismissed in any honest conversation about digital wellness. The question is not whether online connection is valid, but whether it is balanced with the kinds of embodied, present, face-to-face interactions that also nourish something essential in human beings, because there is growing evidence that the body plays a crucial role in emotional regulation and social bonding in ways that screens cannot fully replicate. The nervous system co-regulates with other nervous systems through physical proximity, through tone of voice and facial expression and touch, through all the channels of communication that existed long before language itself, and when those channels are underused, something in the social and emotional self begins to feel undernourished, even if the screen-based connections are real and meaningful. So digital wellness for young people involves tending to both of these dimensions, the online and the embodied, not as competing priorities but as complementary ones, and perhaps the most important thing you can take from this entire conversation is the invitation to become genuinely curious about your own inner life in relation to the digital world you inhabit. Not judgmental, not anxious, not guilty about how you have been using technology up until now, but curious, because curiosity is the beginning of all genuine growth, and the questions worth sitting with are simple but profound. Questions like, what do I actually feel when I put my phone down? What do I reach for my phone to avoid feeling? Which digital spaces leave me feeling more like myself? And which ones leave me feeling like a diminished version of myself? What do I wish I had more time and attention for? And what is quietly stealing that time and attention without my full consent? These are not questions with easy answers, and they are not questions you answer once and then move on from. They are questions you return to again and again as you grow and change. And the willingness to keep asking them is itself a form of digital wellness, a commitment to remaining the author of your own inner life rather than a passive receiver of whatever the algorithm decides to feed you next. And you are capable of that authorship more than you know, because the very fact that you are here, listening, thinking, reflecting, is evidence of something genuinely important in you, a hunger for understanding that no amount of scrolling will ever fully satisfy, and that hunger is not a problem to be solved. It is the most human and the most hopeful thing about you.